Chris O'Connor here. Join the Curmudgeon Rock Report's invite-only curmudgeonly community at facebook.com/curmudgeonrock. Also look out for a Spotify playlist that pays honor to this episode.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. Alas, we have reached the end of our third Golden Age of Rock series that spans the years 1976 to 80, when the axis of punk, post-punk, new wave altered the rock landscape forever, stylistically, genre-wise, aesthetically, sonically, you name it. Of course, MTV is right around the corner, and when that launched in 1981, the music landscape was altered even more so, with the way people consume and even think about music changing forever. But that's a year away. Let's focus on the year 1980, which was a very rich, fertile year for rock music of all subgenres. New wave rock reaches its artistic pinnacle when Talking Heads' third straight album with Brian Eno results in the avant-funk ambient jam masterpiece Remain in Light. Post-punk guitars, Latin rhythms, and Afrobeat energy combined to create a swirling sound that would go on to influence bands as widely varied as the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Radiohead, Phish, the Mars Volta, and more. The suicide of lead singer Ian Curtis meant the end of the all-too-brief run of Joy Division, British post-punk's greatest and most important band. Their last couple of singles and their triumphant final album, Closer, not only cemented their legacy as the band that created the template for goth, but also as one of the most influential British bands of all time. After the legend-making masterpiece London Calling, The Clash got even bolder and more daring, creating a triple album, Sandinista, that's even more of a genre and ethnic melting pot than the previous album. Dub reggae and lots of it, Motown soul, Tin Pan Alley pop, funk, punk, Caribbean pop, jazz, folk, and classic rock and roll all collide to create a dizzying kaleidoscopic tour de force that still stands as one of rock's most ambitious statements of all time. Led Zeppelin's legendary drummer drinks himself to death and ends the run for one of the greatest, most remarkable rock groups of all time. But hard rock and heavy metal were far from dead. In fact, 1980 is a banner year as three stone-cold classics cement legacies for AC/DC, Motorhead, and Rush. Prince shows what the 1980s will sound like with Dirty Mind, his visionary blend of funk, R&B, pop, and electronica. We're going to give you a lightning round rundown of classic punk, post-punk, and new wave singles, as well as a quick roll call of other all-time classic albums from this seminal year. So join us for the dawn of the 1980s and the dusk of the third golden age of rock. Welcome to the Curmudgeon Rock Report.
Okay, folks, it's that time of the episode here at the beginning. We always like to take a venture over into the parallel universe. The parallel universe is a special place for us. It's on the other side of the space-time continuum, and it's where rock and roll still predominates. It's where rock and roll truly does never die and never did die, and is still the big time chart music, the big time Billboard music, the big time arena music. And that's a way of saying that this is the segment of the show where we cover rock and roll albums and other major, pop genres from artists that we think that you would really enjoy. New and newish artists. We say new and newish because sometimes we go back within a decade and cover some of these records. So, Arturo, who are you covering on this edition of the Parallel Universe?
Yes. So if in a parallel universe where not just good rock music, but good music in general would be mainstream instead of the garbage 90% garbage mainstream pop that is popular in our universe, Greentea Peng would be a star. I am covering the second and latest album by British R&B soul funk chanteuse Greentea Peng, titled Tell Dem It's Sunny. Her first album, 2021's Man Made, was an intoxicating blend of spaced out neo psychedelic funk, as if Erykah Badu decided to delve deeply into dub reggae and trip hop. I thought it was a very strong record, but if there was one criticism to be had, it was that it got too atmospheric, a little too ethereal, too soupy and meandering, especially in the middle. It could have been edited down to a more palpable 12 or 13 track album rather than the 18 track opus it was meant to be. Well, she more than remedies this on her sophomore effort. It's much more focused and much more forceful in its sonic assault than the previous album. The songs are tighter, catchier, and all around groovier than on her debut. The main reason for this, aside from Peng's alluring voice and her much improved songwriting and increasingly introspective lyricism, is the production work done by various UK hip hop producers, such as Earbuds, Samo, Nat Powers, and St. Francis Hotel. Yes, these are their production names, not their real names, obviously. The key word here is hip hop, because hip hop beats and grooves really make up the prominent sound throughout the record. It's the hip hop that gives the music a profound grittiness as well as its propulsive thrust. Peng's vocals range between soulful belting to crooning, with some quasi-rapping thrown throughout as they adorn impeccable R&B soul hybrid tracks such as One Foot, Raw, and my favorite track, Stone's Throw, with its skittering drum and bass techno beat driving the heartbeat for Peng's anguished, tortured vocals and lyrics. The dub reggae of her previous album gets transformed to a lean, mean dance hall reggae beat on Nowhere Man. The sultry trip hop groove of, as well as Peng's vocal phrasings of Green, evoke a more Afrocentric Portishead. The End, with peace in parentheses, has an ambient techno beat straight out of 1990s Autiker, but if Autiker were drenched in black soul music. And What You Mean has a hip hop techno hybrid groove that's begging for a guest rapper. I absolutely love this album. An easy 4.5-star album for me, and one of my two favorites of the year so far. Chris?
Yeah, pretty good record. I most appreciate Peng's voice. It has a texture to it and a depth to it that when she goes back and forth between speak sing and crooning,
Yeah.
that she does so effortlessly, and
Right.
she rides these beats effortlessly as well, and yeah, the beat work here it's pretty indicative of the British, or at least the Afro-British scene of the last 5 years or so. It reminds me of work from bands like Salt
Yeah.
and bands like that, and so it's just really really strong stuff. And she's an interesting story because she's half Arab and half African, and
Right.
grew up in London, so she's got this kind of world weariness or this world beat consciousness to her that seeps into her vocals and seeps into her musical preferences and seeps into the collaborations with these producers. So yeah, she's definitely got a future, and hopefully she'll make albums more than once every 4 years.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to see her be a little bit more prolific and to watch her growth. So good stuff. Again, I wouldn't go as far as to say 4.5 stars. I think there's a limit to this kind of thing, and maybe it gets a little samey towards the end. But no, I can see why you like it. This is like way up your alley.
Well, I just think it's tighter than her first album. Like from top to bottom, it's a tighter record, you know? I mean, there are a couple of clunkers on it, excuse me. But overall, I think it's just the songwriting got tighter, the lyrics got better, and the grooves are groovier. That's just the way I see it.
All right, let's give it up for Groovier Grooves.
Yep.
You know, and from there, speaking of tighter, let's cover the album that I'll be addressing here in the parallel universe. This is from a band called the Tubs, and the name of the album is Cotton Crown. We've covered the Tubs on this podcast before a couple years ago. They had their debut album, Dead Meat, which I really liked. And this album, I think, is stronger and better and is one of the more compelling records I think I'll hear all year. So let me start talking a little bit about the Tubs and Cotton Crown. When Welsh band The Tubs dropped their debut album Dead Meat in 2023, they made it fairly easy for lazy ears to write a quick review. They played jangle pop that evoked early REM, and singer Owen Williams sounded bizarrely and startlingly like Richard Thompson, a curmudgeonly favorite. So imagine Richard Thompson fronting Murmur era REM. That was the review. But a closer listen revealed that the band dabbled in an assortment of moods and complex emotions. There was a darkness that permeated their lighter, poppier sound. That's still the case here 2 years later. The Tubs recently released the follow-up to Dead Meat called Cotton Crown, and while the template remains easy to describe, the band has grown tighter and now rock harder. They also wear their Celtic influences more on their sleeve in the arrangements. Plus, the Tubs have grown even darker, judging by this band's gloomy lyrics about romantic obsession, self-loathing, and family tragedy. Seriously, Owen Williams is not in a good headspace here. Quote, said, you never met someone you hate like me, and you say your love is like a ticking clock, but it's been so long we both know it's not. He laments on deceptively jaunty album opener The Thing Is. On the alternatingly pretty and desperate sounding Narcissist, Williams reveals his twisted brand of loneliness. Williams opens with, quote, Jane says you're a narcissist. Well, I want to see. You should do it to me. You should do it to me, end quote. Geesh. And then on the chorus, he sings, sick of the vibe in my room, sick of the flowers all in bloom, sick of my friends telling me all the things that I could do, sick of London, of seeing all this through. Double geesh. The best song on the album is the ultra-melodic, ultra-dramatic tune Embarrassing, on which Williams confesses an unhealthy romantic obsession with a woman, even though he's currently dating another woman, going as far as to stare at the phone and wait for messages to come. The album ends on a truly uncomfortable note, an upbeat-sounding, beautifully melodic song called Strange, on which the singer recounts conversations with friends following the suicide of his mother. Cotton Crown is one of the most striking listens I'll probably engage in all year. It's a tuneful, rollicking set of songs about the darkness of the heart and the dark side of life. It grows stronger and more profound with repeated listens. This one is going to stick with me for quite a while, I gotta say, Arturo.
Yeah, not with me. We reviewed the Tubs a couple of years ago when their first album came out, and I had the same opinion about them then than I have now. It's just retro revival 1980s UK indie jangle pop with a Richard Thompson impersonator as the lead singer. One thing I will say, yes, this album rocks more than the first one. You're right about that. I agree. It does rock more. It's got more of an energy to it. It has more of a bounce. But I don't think the melodies are any more compelling or improved. I don't think the arrangements are any more interesting. Energy can do a lot for a band to help them get better. But at the same time, you just need better, more memorable, hookier songwriting. And these guys simply don't have it yet, as far as I'm concerned. If I can recommend something a little better, Owen Williams, the lead singer of this band, he has a side project called X Void. It's a band that he's in with another singer-songwriter by the name of Alana McCardle. That band is better than the Tubs. And they put out a record this year called In Love Again that's pretty good. It's basically the Tubs with better hooks and better melodies and better vocals too.
Okay, which sounds like an album I'd like.
Tracks that I recommend are songs Nightmare and Strange Insinuation. The moral of the story is this. If you're going to sound so much like Richard Thompson as a singer that it's so distracting and disorienting to Richard Thompson fans, better stick him as a background vocalist. And that's what X Void does with Owen Williams in their band. I think they're better for this kind of stuff. Yeah, that's my way of reviewing the Tubs. Better off checking the other band, Tubbs related, X Void.
Yeah, I gotta say, in terms of the Richard Thompson impression, it's less distracting this time because it's coming, and so you can kind of pay attention more to the lyrics and to the song structures, and I disagree with you. I think there's actually some pretty good melodies on this band on this album. I think that the album opener is really good. I think Narcissist is really good. I think Embarrassing is really good. I think that there are some strong hooks, and they are getting better. Are they consistent as far as those hooks and as far as those melodies? No, there are a couple of songs that fall a little short melodically, but I would say, it's a strong record, and they're a good band, and they're only going to get better. And hopefully they'll even get more energetic and they'll get even more melodic. And at some point, the Richard Thompson thing will go by the wayside, and people won't be as hung up about that as they tended to be, at least with Dead Meat.
Chris here again. We usually end our episodes by inviting you to join our Curmudgeonly community page on Facebook. Well, we're picking up our efforts there. Know people just as passionate as us about rock and roll? Invite them to join in the fun. You don't actually need our permission to do so. Also, expect to see a lot more content up there moving forward. Our mission is to engage you, so darn it, we'll engage you like a fire hose, or maybe like a firehouse if we're going to give love to Gene Simmons. We may also be making a few offers. Want to wear a t-shirt featuring our logo? You may have that opportunity soon. So be a fellow curmudgeon, help us expand our little community, and share your own musings via your own posts. We're at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock.
Here we are, folks. 1980. 1980 is one of the most definitive pivot points probably in rock and roll history, and we end the third golden age of rock here because what it did is it set up the 80s, and it as Arturo said in the parameter setter, it predates MTV by a year and sets the table, and actually serves up quite a few of the songs that would end up in heavy rotation on MTV, and sets things up so new wave comes full blast. And you get funk full blast, and you get some really strong pop and some really strong post punk that comes out in this year, and it was just a really strong year across the board. And the interesting thing about 1980 is that several of the dominant albums that were in play in 1980 actually came in very late in 1979. And so kind of spilled over into 1980. And so it's kind of hard. In my mind, 1979 and 1980 have always bled into one another.
Yeah.
And there's times where I have to look things up where, sometimes I think Remain in Light is 1979, and sometimes I think Off the Wall is 1980. And so, I have to kind of clear those things up. But yeah, strong year. And so let's start talking about it now, and let's start talking about it at the most logical point. This is this album on the Rolling Stone 500 Greatest Albums list that was published in 2020. This is the top album from the 1980s by a white rock and roll band on the entire list. It's in the 30s. What are we talking about, Arturo?
High. Yeah. I love this album. I don't know if I'd put it that high, but anyway, yeah. Talking Heads. When Talking Heads released their magnum opus, Remain in Light, in 1980, It seemed that everything they had done since their first album was a lead up to this point. With their 1977 debut, Talking Heads 77, the band invented a skewed brand of quirky, highly literate art pop with confessional lyrics about neuroses and complex social observations. Way ahead of their time, Talking Heads seemed to create the template for indie rock of the 1990s and onward that inspired bands as disparate as Pavement, Modest Mouse, and Vampire Weekend. On 1978's commercial breakthrough, More Songs About Buildings and Food, their first of 3 albums produced by Brian Eno, there was a spaciousness and an expanse in their sound that made room for R&B and soul, deep funk, and synthesizer and electronic textures. Fear of Music from 1979 augmented their innovative and infectious style of art rock with Afrobeat rhythms, full-on synth pop, and a deepening lyrical despair that seemed to signal the end of bandleader David Byrne's period of existential crisis, at least in his lyrics. Remain in Light kickstarted the 1980s for the band by taking all the elements of their previous records that made the band so special, consolidated them, and then blew them up to a widescreen cinematic level. The first half of this 8-track record has a burning, seething intensity to it that makes you wonder if Talking Heads are even a rock band anymore, and instead are just a straight-up funk band. Born Under Punches starts the album off with a seemingly soft, lilting, slick guitar tone groove that gradually crawls its way to your hips, much like the indigenous Soweto sounds of South Africa. Cross-eyed and Painless hits you in both the ass and the crotch, like Parliament taking disco, warping it with syncopation, and bathing it in amphetamine-laced acid. The Great Curve, probably the best track on the whole album, is a mesmerizing tour de force of polyrhythmic, Fela Kuti-inspired Afrobeat funk that builds with ferocity as it goes on, complete with Andrew Ballew's heavy metal guitar skronking and a powerful horn section. Once in a Lifetime is the biggest hit and most well-known song, with that iconic underwater sound effect and thick-ass bass line straight out of an old Lee Scratch Perry record, leading into that anthemic Latin music-based chorus that soars to the sky. The second half is where things get weird and turn into a mutated ambient jam of rock electronic fusion. Houses in Motion echoes Born Under Punches' South African groove, but with a darker, menacing atmosphere that portends the subterranean depths the album would soon go into. Seen and Not Seen takes the spacey mood and thick bass lines associated with dub reggae and infuses them with glistening synthesizers, echoey guitars, and an avant-garde sense of the surreal, complete with Byrne's spoken word lyrics about God knows what. Listening Wind is where Eno truly shows his production hand, with the noise effect-laden ambient atmosphere a la Eno's 1975 masterpiece, Another Green World, being adorned with another delectable dub reggae bass line and some of Byrne's most beautiful and melodic vocals. By the time the album ends with the gloomy, nearly goth rock atmospheric dirge of The Overload, the listener has run the gamut from serotonin rush ecstasy to meditative head music. Very few albums in rock history, or music history in general, are so bold and ambitious in its scope, so daring and challenging, while being unrelentingly catchy and listenable. The influence of Talking Heads, and this record in particular, is really echoed throughout the years. You can hear the hyperkinetic funk of Cross-Eyed and Painless in peak 1990s era Red Hot Chili Peppers. You can hear the complex Afro-Cuban rhythms and menacing momentum-building drive of the Great Curve in the best of early Mars Volta. You can hear the ambient-flavored fusion of electronica and impressionistic rock guitar of much of the album's second half in Radiohead's explorations in the 2000s. Hell, even the legendary jam band Phish covered this album in its entirety at a Halloween show in 1996. Undisputedly, one of the greatest albums of all time. Remain in Light is the record that encapsulates everything that made Talking Heads such an unbelievably important and influential band. Chris?
See, I've always thought of this record as a great half an album. Cross-Eyed and Painless, The Great Curve, Once in a Lifetime, and Houses in Motion are all astonishing, are all just beautifully written, are all just wonderfully performed, with just intense energy and just real originality that just seeps and just bursts out of the speakers. The rest of the album, I've never been as compelled by. I understand what they're going for. Born Under Punches, for what it's worth, is the most popular of these songs on Spotify, by a lot, actually. It's kind of surprising. It's got like 15 million more plays than the next closest one. So it kind of shows you that maybe, who knows, maybe I'm wrong. But, I've never been a huge fan of Listening Wind. I think that's a little too precious for its own good. And so it's when we're talking objectively, yeah, I agree with everything you just said as far as the influence of the record, as far as the sweep of the record, as far as the ambition of the record. Eno and Byrne were in rare form, and they were looking to sort of capture the world's rhythms, one palette at a time or many palettes at a time.
Yeah.
They were doing a lot of cross-pollination on this record. But for me, The Great Curve, you're right, is definitely the best song on the record, and it has that breakdown in the middle with the horns. And not only that, but this is what a decision by Brian Eno to invite Adrian Belew
Yeah.
to contribute guitar. Belew actually was Robert Fripp's replacement in King Crimson.
Yeah.
And he comes in and he does this abrasive avant-garde guitar noise over a lot of those rhythms. And it really, really works, especially on Cross-Eyed and Painless and The Great Curve. And even Once in a Lifetime, he's got some guitar noise on there too that really adds to it. So that was a great touch. And, this was the end of the collaborations with Eno. And they did go out in grand style. I'll give them that. I think the records, more songs about building and food, Fear of Music, and Remain in Light is one of that belongs in great 3-album streaks.
Yeah.
In rock history, and I think
No, I throw the first album in there as a 4-album streak. I think the first album's brilliant too.
yeah. I mean, for first album, I've always been kind of half and half on too. The high points are high points, the low points are low points, but it's good stuff.
Another, like I said before, another unbelievably influential record on American indie rock and what it became in the 2000s.
I won't argue with you on that. Yeah, I've just never been as big a fan of that as these other 3 records. But like I said, good stuff. It's not my favorite personal Talking Heads record is Fear of Music, by quite a lot, actually. I think the conceptual nature of it kind of puts it over the top. Going from super tight and super funky to super ambient and super minimal by the end, and traveling down that road, and all of the anxieties that it expresses. So that's my Talking Heads jam. But you take the middle of this record, you take tracks 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you put those together and you put them in the EP, that would be by far the greatest EP ever made.
I don't know, man. You're in the minority there, Chris.
No shit.
Anyway.
I know that. I tend to be in the minority quite a lot.
All right, Chris. So something that neither of us are in the minority of, we're both in the majority of, is in the love of this band and this record. What is it, Chris?
We're talking about Joy Division and Love Will Tear Us Apart and the album Closer, which are among the...
Is it Closer or Closer?
Closer. Closer. It's not baseball. It's Closer. Okay. Yeah, and so the album Closer and the single Love Will Tear Us Apart, we're talking some of the greatest post-punk and the birth of goth rock, and it's worth celebrating. So let's talk about Joy Division and the 1980 that they had, which wasn't all good. Why?
Especially for Ian Curtis.
Nope. Yeah. Joy Division singer and lyricist Ian Curtis, beset with worsening epileptic seizures and unbearable marital strife, committed suicide on May 18th, 1980. He was only 23 years old. Curtis's death was tragic in and of itself, but its timing made it even more tragic. It came just before Joy Division, which had impressed in 1979 with its moody debut album Unknown Pleasure, broke fully into the British rock mainstream. Their first was the classic single Love Will Tear Us Apart in June 1980. Then came the sparse but tense goth rock masterwork Closer a month later. Let's talk about each. First, Love Will Tear Us Apart. Love Will Tear Us Apart is a magnificent rock song, one of the best of its era and of all time, really. The song juxtaposes up-tempo, hopeful keyboard and bass riffs with Curtis's decidedly downbeat vocals and grim lyrical assessment of a marriage in serious danger. Curtis in verse 3 sings, quote, "You cry in your sleep, all my feelings exposed. There's a taste in my mouth as desperation takes hold. Is it something so good, just can't function no more," end quote. The singer was dwelling in darkness and Love Will Tear Us Apart, even as his bandmates kept the musical backdrop textured and rocked out. The appealing melancholy of the song drove it to become Joy Division's first hit, as it landed on number 13 on the British singles chart. Nothing on the album Closer, which followed closely behind Love Will Tear Us Apart, is as commercial as the single, yet the music on Closer is wholly exciting and for its time was wholly original. This was the sound of post-punk morphed into something darker, artier, and more tense. This was effectively the beginning of what became known as goth rock, with a sonic revolution taking place over the course of 9 songs and 44 minutes. The dark, brooding atmospherics of the album make themselves apparent immediately on marvelous 6-minute album opener Atrocity Exhibition, which is driven by Stephen Morris's rapid drum rolls and a sick bass line laid down by Bernard Sumner, usually the primary guitarist, but here showing himself to be an astute groove meister. And usual bassist Peter Hook also switches instruments, making the song thrash in the shadows with abrasive guitar work. Meanwhile, producer Martin Hannett places Curtis's sensual baritone vocals right up top the mix, giving the song an urgency that makes it play like a funky funeral dirge. Atrocity Exhibition, as a result, sets a dramatic tone for the album that never relents. Consequently, Closer is one of the most unceasingly taut rock creations in the genre's entire canon. Atrocity Exhibition is followed next by Isolation, a danceable, synth-laden ode to self-loathing. Seriously, Curtis is on a bum trip here. Quote, "Mother, I tried. Please believe me. I'm doing the best I can. I'm ashamed of the things I've been put through. I'm ashamed of the person I am." End quote. And you wonder what happened in that May. Elsewhere, Hook propels Colony with a nasty lurking bass line as Curtis sings about severe alienation among a defined society. Sumner's guitars drive the swiftly rocking A Means to an End, and Curtis's vocals float sublimely over the moody bass line to 24 Hours. The album ends on an appropriately brooding note, with a mysterious haunting synth loop inspiring Curtis to lament about the pain and agony of young men on Decades. "Where have they been?" he asks plaintively on the song's chorus, supplying a genuinely morose touch with which to finish the album. Following Curtis's death, Sumner, Hook, and Morris went on to form New Order, which became famous for mostly leaving the darkness behind and serving up an electronic dance rock take on post-punk. One can't help wonder, though, how Joy Division would have evolved if Curtis had navigated his pain and lived. This band was an endlessly inventive tour de force and a grade A purveyor of darkness. The world probably missed out on several more goth rock masterpieces. It's definitely worth contemplating for sure, right, Arturo?
Yeah, 2 things. Number one, I wouldn't say Closer created goth because the template for goth was already done before by Joy Division themselves with their 1979 album Unknown Pleasures. I would argue that album is gothier than Closer because of the drums.
It's definitely more atmospheric and moodier.
Yeah. It's atmospheric and moodier. Closer's got more of an aggression to it. Unknown Pleasures has those tight compressed drum sound and that weird eerie ambience to it. And also, Bauhaus released Bela Lugosi's Dead in 1979. Come on. That's like, goth.
Well,
You know,
yeah.
as I talked about in the previous episode in this series, in the 1979 episode of the Third Golden Age of Rock. Um, Also, what would have happened had Curtis not died? Honestly, I think it would have been New Order with Ian Curtis on vocals.
You think?
Yeah, I don't think they could have gone any darker than they went with these two albums with Unknown Pleasures and Closer. They couldn't have, they went as far as they could take it. I think if had Curtis lived, it would have been New Order. It would have been exactly what New Order had became. It would, and, Blue Monday would have had Ian Curtis on vocals. How
Yeah.
does it feel? You could totally imagine that.
You just made him sound like Sammy Davis Jr. The hell, that was a bad impression. That was a really bad impression of Ian Curtis. Yeah. How does it feel?
That's Ethel Merman, dude. Come on.
We're getting even more Broadway. Okay. So neither of us can do a very good Ian Curtis, but we try. That's what makes the Curmudgeon Rock Report so entertaining. It's just two random dudes just trying their best. What can we
All
say?
right, so we go from two consecutive masterpieces to an album that I think is a fucking masterpiece. Chris, you go into it. What does the Clash do to follow up London Calling?
They do as much as possible. And even more than that. We're talking about Sandinista, which was a triple album of lots of stuff and lots of styles and a real kaleidoscope of stuff and a real event. This is like in the album as event in its extreme. So let's talk about Sandinista. Sandinista is a sweeping meditation on oppression and rebellion. Quote, "Look here, what do you think you're going to be doing next year?" asks band leader Joe Strummer on Look Here. Quote, "No lie. How do you know you're not going to up and die? No doubt. Soon enough your friends will find out. Take care. You might not have much time to spare. Look here." Later on The Equalizer, the band sings in unison, "We don't want no gang boss. We want to equalize." Hey, there's some communism for you. The urgency and realities of revolution are on full blast on this album. Sandinista, named after the socialist revolutionaries in Nicaragua that Ronald Reagan would try to thwart a few years after this album came out, is a huge, bloated, dizzying, at times indulgent, endlessly fascinating fire hose of a record. Its release came roughly a year after the band dropped its absolute masterpiece London Calling on the masses. And if people thought that record was ambitious, then they must have been really tickled by what followed. Double albums, it turns out, couldn't contain this band at its peak. Nope, they needed 3 albums to fully share its sprawling rock and roll vision. Yep, there really are 36 songs packaged for a single sitting over 144 minutes on this a bona fide full-blown 6-sided triple album. The record naturally is notable for the sheer scope of its musical influences on display. It's a virtual jukebox explosion. There's more than a dollop of dub reggae here, with some songs getting the full-blown Jamaican electronic treatment. These tunes are aided by Lee Scratch Perry protege Mikey Dread, who provides the vocals for The Crooked Beat and Living in Fame, and otherwise serves as something of a co-producer and co-mixer. The Clash also steps fully into funk and hip-hop on rollicking album opener The Magnificent Seven, which offers a portrait of the modern sad sack proletariat about to burst into bloody war. And also, there's Lightning Strikes, not once but twice, a tribute to the grittier side of New York City. The band additionally serves up Motown soul, Caribbean pop, classical music in the form of Rebel Waltz, music hall, Buddy Holly style country rock romp, and in heavily satiric moments, even dabble in disco, electro-pop, and gospel. Ironically, the most conventionally punk pop song on the album, the Hood on the Run anthem Police on My Back, is actually a cover of a song written and performed previously by the Equals. The Equals were Eddie Grant's band before Eddie Grant broke out and did Electric Avenue.
Right.
To call the Clash a punk band at this point was pretty much an insult. Their fervor and enthusiasm for popular music of all forms knew no bounds, and it made them a hell of a lot of fun to behold. The overall joyfulness of the music is counterbalanced, however, by a grim sense lyrically of the realities of of poverty, crime, fascistic government, rule, and imperialist violence. The songs Washington Bullets and Charlie Don't Surf put the latter on striking, sobering display. The song Something About England recounts the rough post-war days the UK endured a generation earlier, and The Call-Up is a ditty about conscientious objection to serving in the Queen's Army. Even the Throwaways managed to comment slyly on the condition of the world the Clash's members faced. See especially for this a cover of the Clash's earlier tune Career Opportunities, as sung by two young boys years away from facing such actual hardship. Joe Strummer once called the Clash the only rock band that mattered. Maybe he did so cheekily, but given the sheer audacity often on display on first London Calling and then Sandinista, it's a comment that can be defended pretty well in reality. The Clash just had so much to say and delved into so many ways to say it. The tub reggae volleys on Sandinista are especially meaningful as a cross-cultural bridge to harmony and an expanded consciousness of struggle, strife, and the fight just to survive in this world. This really is just a remarkable album, isn't it, Arturo?
Yeah, and it's not a hyperbole to call the Clash the Beatles of punk rock.
Oh,
So
yeah.
if London
Not at
Calling,
all.
if London Calling is their Sgt. Pepper's, this is their White Album, and I've always said the White Album is the Beatles' best album. I don't think this is the Clash's best album, but you know what? I think it's their second best.
Yep.
I mean, it's hard to say that a triple album, like a lot of people, I think the common opinion on Sandinista is that it's too much, it's too big, it's 3 albums, it should have been a double, blah, blah, blah. I think it's perfect as is. I think the dub reggae explorations, even the long form ones, are perfect. They fit the mood of the record. Lyrically, everything fits. Every song fits the lyrical theme. Like you said, oppression and rebellion and capitalist imperialism. Every track touches on it in some way, either directly or indirectly. And musically, it's just a smorgasbord. That's the whole point. You know, the indulgent, if you want to call it, eclecticism and versatility is the point. The Clash are trying to show you that punk rock can be more than punk rock. Being as eclectic and as just, basically poly whatever is possible, polyamorphic when it comes to music.
Yep.
You cannot make a more punk rock
statement.
statement than that, than saying everything is rock and roll, everything is good, all music is amazing. Most people don't think that. Most people, when you ask people, what kind of music do you like? It pisses me off when people say, oh, I like everything. Bullshit.
No, you don't.
Nobody likes everything. And the people who do say that are usually basic normies with like lowbrow taste in music. And when they say I like everything, they just say I like everything that's mainstream pop. Well,
Yeah, or Toby Keith.
or Toby Keith. Here is the Clash going 180 degrees the opposite direction. This is everything. This is the entire scope of not only popular music, but music in general on an international level. No band really since this album has dealt, maybe Talking Heads a little bit, but not even with the depth and the breadth that the Clash did on this record. No band has expanded the vocabulary of rock and roll, stretch rock and roll to the breaking point that it's not even rock and roll anymore. It's a pan-African, pan-American, pan-European, pan-global everything. No band since the Clash has done that. And I'll stake my claim to that.
I think that's pretty much true. I mean, there's been some artists that have dabbled in some things, like even Michael Jackson did Afrobeat a little bit on Wanna Be Starting Something.
But did Michael Jackson do everything in one album?
Nope.
Like the Clash did?
He certainly didn't do dub reggae. Although, could you imagine? I mean, he probably could have. And Michael's so talented, he could have done anything. But he stuck to R&B mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, nobody really came close to wanting to. Did anybody really want to do a 36 song, six-sided triple album? I mean, they did it, rumor has it that they did that to kind of fuck with its label. Yeah, because
Yeah.
the label said it didn't really want a double album and then released a couple of double albums after they released London Calling. So to kind of goof on them, that's why they went for the triple album treatment.
And
Kind of,
apparently, the Clash they themselves absorb the costs of production for the
yeah.
physical copies of the triple album. They said we'll pay for it ourselves.
Yeah,
Just to
well,
put it
because
out there.
they wanted to sell it at a low cost, and the only way they
Yeah,
could do it was by sacrificing royalties.
right. So hey, and it cost them money, but it made their reputation, it made them legends, and it made a legendary record out of it. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So next we are here in the year 1980 in our third golden age of rock. We're going to go into a rundown, a lightning round of classic punk, post-punk, and new wave singles from this seminal year. That right before MTV changed everything, many of these songs were just staples of radio or even underground college radio. So I'm going to go through them. Chris, you can intersperse your comments throughout. Wait to the end. Do whatever the hell you want to do. But I'm gonna fucking go. Are you
I'll
ready?
wait till I'm waiting till the end, baby. So let's
All right. So here we go.
go lightning,
All right.
baby.
Here we go. First, Blondie with Call Me. Released as a single right in the middle of Blondie's imperial reign as one of the biggest bands in the world. This came off the soundtrack to the Richard Gere film American Gigolo, a sharp blast of pop rock bombast. The chugging guitar riff oddly resembles Black Sabbath's Children of the Grave. Deborah Harry's vocals and phrasing, as well as her irresistible persona and punk-infected attitude, simply ooze sexuality and sexual charisma. Blondie at their peak. Next, The Cure, A Forest. This single represents the transition of The Cure from post-punk oddballs to angst-ridden goth punks. The eerie atmospheric production, the thin compressed drum sound, the long drawn-out introduction. It all owes a lot and a bit of a debt to Joy Division, but that's okay because Robert Smith and company make it all their own like a more art house Bauhaus. Their goth masterpiece is a couple of years away. That would be Pornography from 1982. Anyway, next, the B-52s, Private Idaho. While not as kinetically bonkers and infectious as the previous year's Rock Lobster, this track still rocks with the 1960s surf music meets new wave bubblegum energy that this band made their own. Their reputation as the world's greatest party band starts to take shape here. Hailing from Athens, Georgia, their success paved the way for music journalists to pay attention to the town's small, fertile music scene, and for a young, ambitious band by the name of REM to get noticed. Next, The Ruts, Staring at the Rude Boys. Alongside Sham 69, the Ruts were the UK's quintessential working class punk band. While most punk bands were drifting off into post-punk textures and new wave accessibility, they stayed defiantly punk, and this standalone single may be their most polished straight-ahead single, a tribute to the Two-Tone Records ska punk scene led by the Specials. It was the last single they released before singer Malcolm Owen's death due to a heroin overdose in the summer of 1980. Next, Bush Tetris with Too Many Creeps, a central band that was part of New York City's post-punk no-wave scene, essentially New York's second wave of punk after the one that characterized the city's original CBGB scene. Bush Tetris were unashamedly the funkiest of the bunch, as characterized by this funkalicious dance floor filler bemoaning the loss of interesting people worthy of sleeping with in a withering art scene. Next, The Slits. In the beginning, there was rhythm. No band of this era did offbeat, off-kilter, subversively danceable, reggae-influenced post-punk rock better than London's The Slits. And this band followed up their classic debut album from the previous year, which we talked about in the 1979 episode of the Third Golden Age of Rock series, with this sprawling reggae funk jam that may as well have been their manifesto. Silence is a rhythm too, you know. Next, Mission of Burma, Academy fight song. Boston's Mission of Burma came storming out of the gate with this debut single, a charging blast of anthemic punk that owes a large debt to The Clash, or at least The Clash's early sound. What's interesting about this band is that they would very soon develop a more original, gnarly, tightly coiled, and complex post-hardcore sound that would be a fundamental influence on bands like Fugazi and onward to Archers of Loaf and At the Drive-In. Next, Flipper with Ha Ha Ha. Hailing from San Francisco, Flipper were the loudest and sludgiest band of that city's punk scene. The darkly hilarious misanthropy of their lyrics would go on to be an inspiration to a young Kurt Cobain. But more importantly, their deep bass-driven grooves provided a heaviness that most punk bands never even dared to approach. A key progenitor for the grunge sound that would be really big and, well, 5 to 7 years around the corner. Next, This Heat with Health and Efficiency. The members of British band This Heat were musicians who kicked around in bands during the heyday of progressive rock in the early 1970s. Instead of being turned off by punk rock, they were refreshed by it and saw it as a way of rebuilding rock music from the ground up, a philosophy that saw them perfectly aligned with post-punk. This 8-minute scorcher starts off as a Mission of Burma-esque bombastic rock song before sliding into a hypnotic, trancey slice of industrial rock noise. Next, X with White Girl. Discovered and produced by X-Doors keyboardist Raymond Zarek, X were one of the Los Angeles punk scene's most important punk bands. They merged the energy and menace of pure punk with hyper-literate and poetic lyricism and a willingness to experiment with various genres, as well as effortlessly delving into old-school rock and roll and rockabilly. This is an exemplary track with a deep razor-sharp riff and John Doe's and Christine Cervenka's inspired intertwining vocals. Next, a little old band of young Catholic boys from Dublin, Ireland by the name of U2 with I Will Follow. We all know this band would go on to much bigger and better things, but even with this, their breakthrough single that got them noticed beyond the Irish music scene, you can already hear the Edge's patented arpeggiated guitar sound leading the way. Bono's impassioned vocals and earnest lyrics were already in full effect, with the Larry Mullen, Adam Clayton rhythm section just a couple of years away from becoming one of the best in all of rock. And yes, while Christianity would become a theme in much of their music throughout the years, this particular song is not about Jesus, actually. Bono himself has continuously emphasized throughout the years that it's about his teenage yearning for his mother, who died when he was young. Next, The Romantics, What I Like About You. Having one of the greatest and most recognized guitar riffs in all of 1980s pop rock, you all know it. This song was a monster-sized smash hit and would go on to be a staple of classic rock radio for years and years and years. Next, Squeeze, Pulling Muscles from a Shell. Squeeze were clearly on the Elvis Costello side of new wave rock in the late 1970s, early 80s. That is, deceptively complex song constructions, highly verbose and intelligent lyrics, and insidious pop hooks that seeped into your skin. This track and its shifting rhythms is no exception. Next, Devo, Whip It, and Whip It Good. The notorious oddities of new wave pop and punk dating back to the mid 1970s, this song was the band's international breakthrough pop moment, garnering constant airplay on a then nascent MTV in 1981, even though it came out in August of the previous year. A perfect fusion of tight, catchy as hell new wave pop and synth pop, the song is not, as most people think, about sadomasochistic sex or even masturbation. It was intended as a satire of the excessive optimism that was pervasive in American culture at the time. Next, and finally, The Vapors with Turning Japanese. Turning Japanese? I think I'm turning Japanese. I really think so. Now, this song is about masturbation. Sexual frustration never sounded so deliriously fun than this turbocharged, kinetic, bouncy piece of new wave pop rock perfection. They never had another hit afterward, but hey, the royalties from this international smash must have sustained them. Chris?
Yeah, and all this time, I was looking forward to talking about a list that had two songs about masturbation.
No, it's only one.
Turns out it's only one. Yeah, this is a hell of a list. Obviously you have some all-time great pop songs and pop hits. "Call Me" by Blondie, and The Romantics, "What I Like About You, I Will Follow." You have that, but then you balance it out with some really great stuff. Ha 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 ha, hee 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 hee. By Flipper and X's White Girl, and especially Private Idaho, which is to me one of the great rock songs. Like if you did a list of maybe the 150 greatest rock songs ever,
Yeah.
Private Idaho belongs on it. So because it's so fun, and it's not even campy. It's a straightforward song, but it just rocks, and it has that surf rock backbone to it. So. Yeah, lots of good stuff. The Bush Tetris song is hilarious. The Slit song is hilarious too. So again, you put together a pretty good list. That is a good playlist. You want to do a good run through of 1980 and the evolution of music through there. In terms of, by this point, calling it punk and post punk is a little bit misleading. There's some definite new wave here, and a lot of this is just plain old pop.
Yeah, really is.
So this is kind of the forerunner of the 80s, which was like the pop decade of all pop decades.
Yeah.
I mean, even more than the 60s.
Right.
And this kind of sets the table. So good curation, dude. Good curation.
All right. Thank you.
On this episode, we ended our third Golden Age of Rock series. For the next episode, we're nearly picking up where we left off, but focusing on one city in particular, Los Angeles. In the 1980s, Los Angeles was a melting pot of so many different styles of rock, with musicians coming from all over the country, coming to the City of Angels to follow their rock and roll dreams. It really was the rock and roll center of America for a time. We're going to examine the music that defined this city for a decade in the first of a two-part series. In the first half of the decade, the LA rock scene and Southern California in general will split in two hemispheres. On one hand, you had the slick, glossy, commercial, yet decadent, flamboyant, and straight-up loud glam and hair metal that Van Halen helped usher in a few years earlier. Bands like Motley Crue, Quiet Riot, Rat, and Hanoi Rocks certainly walked on the wild side and ruled the Sunset Strip. On the other hand, you had the more earnest, more ideologically radical, and rather anti-commercial sound of the city's underground/indie scene. Bands like Black Flag, the Minutemen, and the Germs led the charge for hardcore punk, while bands such as X and the Gun Club took a more sophisticated approach by using the energy of punk to explore rock's roots. Join us next time as the Curmudgeon Rock Report brings you LA Rock in the 1980s, Part 1.
All right, Chris. Now let's move on to the death of Bonzo.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about John Bonham. So 1980 served as something of a line of demarcation for hard rock and heavy metal And that's because this is the year that Led Zeppelin drummer John Bonham died at the age of 32. Bonham died on September 25th of that year. An autopsy performed after his death revealed that he drank the equivalent of 40 shots of vodka the day before,
Good
which
dog.
caused him to vomit in his sleep and aspirate. Anecdotes from the press reporting on Bonham's demise discussed how Bonham, a legendarily heavy drinker, had started his day by consuming four-shot screwdrivers at brunch time prior to a rehearsal with the band, and the vodka consumption continued from there. British newspaper The Guardian reported on October 8th that one test showed an alcohol level of 276 milligrams per 100 milliliters in a sample taken from the bladder. For context, that's about a zero point 0.3 BAC,
Good Lord.
which is not as high as some folks. It's not necessarily zero point 0.4, but that's enough. He was pretty damn drunk. So Bonham's death marked a sad end to an increasingly troubled soul, one so devastating that Led Zeppelin announced it was breaking up on December 4th, 1980, out of respect for their fallen comrade. It also cemented what can be said to be a complicated legacy. Much like The Who's Keith Moon, who had died in 1978 from complications related to his own addictions, Bonham's tale is one that combines the light of his awesome playing with the darkness of his antics away from the stage. As a player, perhaps only Moon and Rush's Neil Peart approached Bonham in terms of power, athleticism, and swing, and hardly anyone tuned his drums any better, allowing Bonham to generate thunder with just a flick of the wrists. Listen to Bonham's signature number and drum solo piece, Moby Dick, which was originally in studio form on Led Zeppelin II, and you hear a drummer who could drive a beat tremendously with his kick drum, who could pound the shit out of his snare drum, and who could make you wonder if an octopus sat behind the kid instead of a mere man. And on that song, could get a compelling sound out of the use he got a compelling drum sound by the use of his hands at one point. The version of Moby Dick on 1969's Led Zeppelin II is awesome, as are the live versions recorded for various live albums and concert films through the 70s and posthumous releases as well. Even at the end of Zeppelin's run, which strained for inspiration and during which the band grew kind of cheesy as Robert Plant and bassist John Paul Jones assumed leadership while guitarist Jimmy Page and Bonham struggled mightily with dependencies, Bonham could still boom his way into something special. Witness the breakdown in the middle of 1979's Fool in the Rain, when Bonham enters furiously with a Caribbean-infused calypso assault. It's a set piece that takes the song from mediocre to electrifying instantly. But take him away from the drum kit, and Bonham was troubled, consumed with exhaustion and anger. His feats of Herculean drinking would be a more awesome thing to behold if they didn't also unleash abusive and violent behavior. In one incident during an American tour in 1977, Bonham, manager Peter Grant, and a couple of others from their entourage beat up a security guard so badly it led to all of their arrests. Needless to say, Led Zeppelin never returned to the States after this tour. If Keith Moon was a loon, then John Bonham was a plain old lout after consuming a few too many drinks. Bonham also fell into a period of heroin addiction, though he cleaned himself up from the junk at least before drinking himself to death. It all got to the point where by the end, Bonham walked a fine line between band definer and band liability, making his death seem as inevitable as it was tragic. What direction would Led Zeppelin have headed in had Bonham lived? It's a subject of great debate. The odds suggest that the members of the band still had a lot to offer musically, but 1979's album In Through the Outdoors showed definite strain and degradation in the quality of the band's input. There's also the fact that the hard rock peers of Zeppelin, like Black Sabbath and Deep Purple, grew unbearably cheesy and corny during the 1980s. Bonham's unfortunate death meant we'd never really get to discover what Zeppelin had left in its tank, but by then its legacy and influence were rock solid, and the DNA of their earlier work is all over the works we'll discuss here soon from other bands. Arturo, what's your thought about Mr. John Bonham?
Well, first of all, had he not died and Zeppelin continued, I think they would have sounded like a cross between solo 80s Robert Plant and Jimmy Page's work in The Firm with Paul Rogers.
Which is to say it would have been pretty bad.
It would have been pretty bad. Yeah, it would have been like that. That's what I think Zeppelin would have gone into. And but yeah, I think you nailed it with Bonham. One of the greatest, if not the greatest, rock drummer of all time. But his abusive behavior, he was an abusive bully when he got drunk. I mean, not so much toward his band members. He always kind of kept them out of it. His Plant was his buddy since he was a kid, and Page was untouchable, and John Paul Jones was never around. So
Yeah.
he would take it out on basically everyone else around him. And physical abuse toward women too, a bit of it. He did a bit of that as well. He was an asshole when he was drunk. I remember I read a biography on Black Sabbath by Mick Wall. Mick Wall, also great British music journalist,
Yeah, he's great.
who wrote the definitive biography on Led Zeppelin. He wrote one on Black Sabbath. And apparently, members of Sabbath hated John Bonham. And in 1980, there's an anecdote, and Mick Wall apparently he did PR for Black Sabbath for a little while in the late 70s, early 80s, and he was in the room when members of Sabbath found, because they were on tour, when they found out that Bonham died. And apparently, Geezer Butler, his only word when he found out Bonham died, good. You know.
Jeez.
Yeah. He made some enemies in the music world, even though they all admired him for, his musicianship and
Which is kind of strange considering that Bonham was the best man at Tony Iommi's wedding.
Yeah. Butler couldn't stand him.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he made enemies, yeah, complicated legacy. Some of the best artists of all time, complicated legacies. They all have it. you know.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so I mean, you can't whitewash an artist's career with like, oh, they were great, and you can't whitewash their bad things, and you cannot just whitewash all their good stuff away. Oh, he did some bad things. Oh, we got to cancel him now. No, you got to take the good with the bad and the bad with the good. They're
Yeah,
human
you have to
beings.
you have to have an entire narrative. You have to have a
Entire
full
narrative.
narrative. You have to have an understanding, and you have to have an appreciation for the history, which I
Yeah.
think a lot of young people are losing that because of all this cancel culture bullshit. That
Yeah.
it's kind of funny. It's like Sam Cooke. These days, if kids were to try to get into Sam Cooke, I think they'd be turned off by how he died.
Yeah, he was he
And
was shot.
yeah, but his womanizing
Yeah.
and his physical abuse towards women
Yeah.
would probably turn them off.
I
And
mean, I don't think it's the womanizing; it's the physical abuse toward women. Women, that is what turned them off, because I mean,
yeah,
everyone in music in the '60s and '70s was a womanizer. I
yeah,
mean, but by that extent, then cancel all of Led Zeppelin, because all four of those guys, or at least three of those four, were
yeah, Mike
womenizers.
Shark.
You know, you know.
Yeah,
I mean, Mick Jagger is lauded and adored by younger generation of fans. And who was the biggest womanizer than Mick Jagger?
I was gonna say, a guy got more pussy than Frank Sinatra, to quote Robbie Robertson. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Anyway, now speaking of Led Zeppelin's demise, filling Led Zeppelin's shoes. Well, there were a few bands that came up and were up to the challenge of doing that. This 1976 to 80 period that we've been covering for 5 episodes now in this series has, for the most part, focused on punk, post-punk, and new wave when it comes to rock music. Hard rock and heavy metal were going through some changes, or changes of the guard to be specific. The old gods, such as Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, and Deep Purple, were dissipating, and new gods, such as Van Halen, were swooping in to replace them. The dawn of the new decade saw three bands who had been around since the mid-1970s step up their game and release all-time classics that either made them legends or moved them closer to achieving legendary status. The first of these is the Australian band AC/DC. The previous year's Highway to Hell was indeed a massive crossover success and brought them to the big league. Producer Mutt Lange's approach to making the band acceptable for mainstream rock radio was by deconstructing their songs and painstakingly recording them piece by piece, guitar riff by guitar riff, note by note, beat by beat, rhythm by rhythm, until the songs were these polished, shiny, glistening gems of rock candy, engineered to grab you by the balls and make you bang your head.
Yep.
The band's momentum seemed to be lost forever when beloved lead singer Bon Scott essentially drank himself to death in early 1980. But after a very brief grieving period, AC/DC decided to carry on and eventually settled as a replacement with British singer Brian Johnson, who had previously bummed around the UK rock scene for various bands throughout the 1970s. Johnson was a very lucky man because all the music to all the songs that would appear on the album to be named Back in Black were already written, worked out, and arranged. All Johnson had to do was put pen to paper, write the words, and record his vocals. He was luckier still because these were hands down, the best batch of songs Angus and Malcolm Young, the band's two guitarists and band leaders, had ever come up with. Combined with Lang's meticulous bottom-to-top approach to in-studio track construction, the end result is as perfect a hard rock or metal album ever created. When Back in Black came out in July of 1980, both hardcore and casual fans were stunned and floored by the sheer power of rock awesomeness they held in their hands and eventually had blasted through their headphones. It charted in the top 10 in album charts around the world and became a phenomenon, making AC/DC a household name then and forever. You don't need me to tell you about the enduring timelessness of both radio and licensing classics, such as the title track, Hell's Bells, and You Shook Me All Night Long. But what makes Back in Black so special is that every single song could have been a single, making it the epitome of a perfect album. Giving the Dog a Bone is as salaciously macho and chauvinistic as it gets, but when it rocks this hard, well, apologies to our female listeners if we have them, but so what? Shoot to thrill, have a drink on me, let me put my love into you, shake a leg, rock and roll ain't noise pollution. Hard rock and metal don't get more sublime than this. The album solidified them in stone as the ironclad standard for boozy, sleazy, badass barroom rock and roll.
Yeah, and song titles don't get less ambiguous.
Let me put my love into you. Indeed.
Absolutely. And I like how you don't automatically assume we have female fans. That's probably a good idea.
But I like to think we do have some. Anyway, Speaking of boozy and sleazy, over in the UK, former Hawkwind bassist Lemmy Kilmister formed Motorhead in 1975 as a trio with himself as the lead singer. The band's no-nonsense, booze and amphetamine-fueled, maximum speed rock and roll would go on to become a foundational influence on both hardcore punk and thrash metal. But in the meantime, it was a slow and gradual climb for the forever underdog band. Never quite the critics' favorites, the band slowly gained favor among both fans and fast metal Deep Purple disciples, Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, as well as fans of the burgeoning punk rock movement. Motorhead's anti-authoritarian, don't give a shit attitude appealed to people on both aisles. And their momentum, gaining a rabid and passionate fan base, eventually grew to set them up for their big album moment. And when I said that, they gained favor among both fans of punk and metal, also fans of the fast metal of the types of, like Deep Purple disciples, Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, fans of those bands as well, really flocked to Motorhead. That big album moment for them came in October 1980 when Ace of Spades came on like a rocket-fueled bulldozer out of hell, making them superstars in the UK and Europe, as well as underground metal stalwarts in North America. The lead single and title track is one of the greatest and most iconic 2 minutes and 49 minutes in the entire history of rock and roll. If there ever was a gateway song to a band's discography, it's this one. It's Ace of Spades. Other tracks: Love Me Like a Reptile, Jailbait, The Chase is Better Than the Catch, We Are the Road Crew, Shoot You in the Back. It's song after song of head-banging, crotch-thrusting, metal power glory. Of course, what holds it all together, aside from the band's tight, muscular crunch and grind, is Lemmy's very underrated songwriting and even more underratedly witty lyrics. No rock music collection is complete without this undisputed classic. Finally, there's the Canadian progressive hard rock band Rush. Since 1974, they had been carefully crafting their innovative original sound that managed to merge show-off musical virtuosity and complexity with compelling, engaging songwriting and wonderful melodic hooks. Over time, they became one of the biggest cult bands in the world, with die-hard fans in their native Canada, the US, and the UK. What established their reputation as a major band was their trio of sci-fi space opera fantasia albums, 1976's 2112, 1977's A Farewell to Kings, and 1978's Hemispheres. By the end of the decade, they really had taken their conceptual narratives and ambitious musicianship of their music to their limit. It was time to pare things down a little and maybe look outside to the greater rock landscape for inspiration. The result was their masterful 1980 release, Permanent Waves. Drummer Neil Peart took his lyrics in a more relatable direction by embracing philosophy, religious imagery, romantic relationships, and even the joy of listening to music on the radio. Guitarist Alex Lifeson and bassist singer Geddy Lee, the musical composition minds of the band, maintained the group's trademark for multi-section songs and exquisite instrumentation, while also expanding the band's musical palette to include reggae, new wave pop, balladry, and even echoes of post-punk goth, especially in the lurching, ominous epic Jacob's Ladder. Really, it does kind of sound like Joy Division, doesn't it? Lead track and single Spirit of Radio became a huge rock radio hit, as well as an instant classic with its scintillating opening guitar salvo, its soaring riffs, and its marvelous reggae break in the middle. Even with its tempo changes, Free Will is the closest thing Rush had come at that point to having a straight-up pop rock song at the time. Different Strings is actually a lovely ballad, albeit a distinctly Rush-flavored ballad. Closing track, Natural Science, possibly my personal favorite Rush song of all time, is at first glance your classic multi-section prog rocking epic Rush track. But a closer listen reveals a song full of marvelous guitar lines that essentially act as the song's pop hooks. Rhythmic shifts that build in momentum rather than alienate the listener, all leading to a closing section of sublime sophistication and power, with Lee singing out Peart's starry-eyed lyrics about the life-affirming beauty of science and nature. Seriously, they really are beautiful lyrics. I'm not giving them due just with my description. Permanent Waves is the album where Rush really crossed over to the mainstream, hitting the top 10 in the US, UK, and Canada, and to the front line of hard rock bands, becoming truly the only progressive band, Rush that is, the only progressive rock band left that mattered. They would become bona fide superstars with their next album, cementing their legacy forever. But for my money, they never got the balance of commercial acceptability and artistic ambition more right than on Permanent Waves. Chris, there's a lot for you to take in there.
Yeah, all three of these are great albums, and you made me laugh. By the way, a misspeak. You described Ace of Spades as a 2-minute and 49-minute song.
No, is it? It's not.
No, it's two. You didn't say 2 minutes and 49 seconds. You said 2 minutes and 49 minutes.
Oh, sorry, my mistake.
No. Don't apologize for that. Could you imagine a 2 hour and 49-minute version of Ace of Spades? That'd be fucking awesome, man. It just keeps going and going and going. Yeah, it's one of the greatest songs of all time. And yeah, and apparently it's now 3 hours long. So good stuff. But these albums are all tremendous. I think that they deserve their props. I agree with you. I think Permanent Waves is probably Rush's best record. I'm also a huge fan of Natural Science. Also like Entre Nous.
Yeah.
Entre Nous is a fun song, and Free Will is obviously still in heavy rotation on classic rock radio for reasons. Same thing with
Yeah.
Spirit of the Radio.
Yeah.
Both of those songs, in terms of multi-sectioned songs that work in a pop construct,
Yeah. Right.
you can't beat those. And I know Built to Spill kind of tried.
Yeah.
They must have been influenced by Permanent Waves when they did Keep It Like a Secret in
Yeah.
1999.
Yeah.
The idea of taking prog rock and distilling it into 5 minute, 6 minute long pop songs.
Yeah.
Because that's essentially what Rush did on this record, and they did it to beautiful effect. The Motorhead record, like you said, just straightforward, just balls out. You can't beat Ace of Spades, a song. You can't beat Lemmy as a vocalist. The image of Lemmy had that huge mic stand that he actually spoke. He sang into, like, looking up,
Yeah.
and he had that huge bass. And so, so he looked like a small guy with his bass and his mic stand. He wasn't a small guy,
Yeah.
but so that's just absolutely iconic, and you can't really beat it. And then what do you say about AC/DC's Back in Black? I call it the greatest breakup album of all time. Only because if you go through a nasty breakup like I did once a little over 20 years ago, you will feel instantly better by listening to Back in Black. That is some serious catharsis. Listen to Have a Drink on Me. Listen to Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution. Listen to Let Me Put My Love Into You. Giving the Dog a Bone. All that stuff. It's misogynistic. It's sophomoric, but damn it, it's beautiful when you're hurting and you hate women. Yeah.
Okay.
If you're hating women at the time and you want to make yourself feel better and get over that nasty breakup, Back in Black is the best medicine ever. That's what I'll say.
All right. Well, speaking of sexy and salacious, the next album, we're going to go away from rock music really into like a visionary vision of R&B and soul that would go into the 1980s. And this can only come from the mind of one Prince Rogers Nelson. Chris?
Yeah, not just a vision, a visionary vision. Good stuff. So we're talking about the album Dirty Mind, which is Prince's third studio album, which came out in October of 1980. One can argue that the 1980s as a musical movement and as a defined thing really started with the release of Prince's Dirty Mind. Over the course of these 8 songs, Prince melded funk, pop, R&B, and electronic music effortlessly and invented a sharp new brand of popular music in the process. But he did so with a minimalist precision. There's none of the guitar pyrotechnics and slow jam, slow burn he later became known for. And this also wasn't no disco. Instead, there were sparse keyboard riffs, slinky bass lines, slapping drum machines, and rhythm guitar flourishes, a mix that gave Prince's come hither falsetto vocals ample space to fill. And it should be noted that Prince played almost all of the instruments on this record, with the exception of a couple of Dr. Fink
Right.
keyboard lines. So, and Come Hither Prince did on Dirty Mind, by the way. The album's name proved apt, as Prince's sexual longing and adventurousness knew no bounds. He celebrates the androgynous nightclub scene of his native Minneapolis on the Thumpers' Uptown and Party Up. He longs to get down and dirty in his daddy's car with a young lady on the funkily robotic title track. And sometimes song titles are just deliciously self-explanatory. Head and Sister, anyone? The former song there, Head, is one of Prince's grooviest numbers in his entire catalog, banging away seductively as Prince hits on a bride-to-be and offers oral pleasure of all kinds. The latter song there, Sister, is, yes, a song about doing it with his sister, but it's also an inspired 91-second rocked-up romp musically. Yet not everything on the album is the product of Prince's craven libido. He serves up a striking, heartfelt ditty about lost love and heartbreak with When You Were Mine. The song marries a surf rock inspired keyboard and guitar arrangement on the verses with girl group Panache on the lamenting chorus. Here we see Prince, the master song craftsman, at work, and the result is a classic, one that Cyndi Lauper covered wonderfully a few years later. What makes Dirty Mind particularly remarkable is that in its themes and its sounds, it bears little actual resemblance to anything from the 1970s, which is something given that this album was released in October of 1980, as we said.
Yeah.
Prince was wholly his own entity even at 22 years old. He was one of one doing his own thing when others were still clinging to neon lit dance floors, Coke spoons, and oversized medallions. The world at large wasn't quite ready for him in 1980, though, and the album peaked at just number 45 on Billboard's 200 albums chart. But before there was 1999 and before there was Purple Rain, there was this album, Dirty Mind, a template for the black music that followed in its wake over the next decade. Arturo, what's your thought on Dirty Mind?
Yeah, I keep thinking it was after the year after this when he released Controversy. He opened for the Rolling Stones during their Tattoo You tour in 1981. It was a big stadium show, and Prince went on stage wearing nothing but knee-high boots, Speedo, like really tight tanga, Speedo, underwear, and a trench coat, and that's it. Basically, what he wore in the video for the single "Dirty Mind." He got booed off the stage. He got called the homophobic F word. He got shit thrown at him. So for the next night, because it was a multi-night stand, he came on stage wearing closer to normal clothes. So when I think of Prince on this era, the album cover. What is the album cover? He's wearing nothing but Speedos and that's it, right?
Yep.
Yeah, he was all about sexuality during this time.
Yep.
And it's weird when you read interviews Prince in his later years, like in the 2000s or the 1990s, after he became a Jehovah's Witness, how he kind of frowned upon this period and he kind of like looks down on it and he's like ashamed of it. Because oh my God, it's so sexualized and blah, blah, blah. Well, dude, this is like when you were at your most fun.
Yeah.
This is you being reckless and edgy and weird and controversial, and it's what is what made his reputation. It set the stage for him being a superstar later on in the 80s.
Yeah, I was going to say
he was from before 1999 the album came out. For like mainstream pop music fans, he was more known for his image and for the controversy than for his music. Among like hardcore fans of R&B and soul music, they knew his songs, they knew Dirty Mind, they knew Controversy. But for mainstream pop heads, it was just all, Prince was just this image of this weird dude, this androgynous dude,
Yeah, I was going to say, I could just imagine he was a little dude too. So it's like this 5'2" horn dog, in Speedos, singing about doing his sister. Yeah.
And not getting head, giving head.
Yeah, I know. To somebody else's wife.
Yeah.
Or wife to be. She's the bride, but she's more into him than she is into the future husband.
Yeah.
So yeah, his mind was pretty wacky.
Yeah.
And we're better for it, damn it.
All right, so now we're going to end this episode. We did a bunch of bands, a bunch of artists, lightning round of singles. Now we're going to end it with a semi-lightning round, but yeah, kind of a lightning round it is, of other albums that were notable and great albums from the year 1980 that deserve to be mentioned, that deserve their props, and deserve you out there to check out if you haven't heard them. Let's start. The Police, Zenyatta Mondatta. The Police are generally known as an all-time great band, and I generally agree. But I've always seen them as a singles band, first and foremost. I really don't think any of their studio albums are that great, aside from the sterling singles, of course, especially Synchronicity, which really is 4 great singles and a bunch of crap. But put a gun to my head and ask me to pick a best Police album, I'd go with Zenyatta Mondatta, which represents the end of their reggae rock phase, as well as the point where they really started to cross over into a mainstream pop rock band. as evident by the huge commercial hit Don't Stand So Close to Me, Sting's Lolita-esque tale of school teacher student attraction. But overall, it's really their funkiest album, with absolutely propulsive scorchers like Driven to Tears and boppers like Canary in a Coal Mine and When the World is Running Down, You Make the Best of What's Still Around. Chris?
Wait, you're not going to mention do 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 dee 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 dee?
Oh yeah, that's a great the do 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 da 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 da. That's a great song too.
Yeah, this is their. I think it's their best record too. And the star of this record clearly is Stuart Copeland.
Yeah.
His drumming on this record is, he's out in front. He's got that reggae style of his. He's like really inventive fills and just propelling a lot of these songs. And one of the reasons, like I said, it's just kind of a funky record, and it's because of him, and
Right.
because of his energy, and because of his playing. And there's the songwriting, and obviously, but Copeland is the real star. And "Driven to Tears" is the masterpiece song on this. I mean,
Right.
just everything about it is just great.
Yeah. Next, The Pretenders and their self-titled debut album. Chrissie Hynde may have been an American expat who was part of London's punk scene in the mid-1970s, but the band she would go on to front became arguably the most commercially successful of any outfit associated with it. Hynde proved herself to be a fantastic songwriter with all-time new wave classics like Precious and the hit single Brass in Pocket. There are also all-out rockers like Tattooed Love Boys and Mystery Achievement. She would have even more hits as the 1980s unfolded. Chris?
Yeah, great songwriter. She had an ability to mix tough and tender, and
Yeah.
so she was kind of the perfect front woman for that. And this version of the Pretenders, the original version with guitarist James Honeyman Scott and bassist Pete Farndon, had a real muscle to it and a real, real agility to it. So, they really rendered some great songs. And there's a really great cover of "Stop Your Sobbing" by the Kinks.
The Kinks, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's probably the highlight of the record for me.
And she would go on to have a relationship with Ray Davies and have a child with him too.
Go figures. Was she a stalker? Sing his song
No,
first and
no,
then
no.
fuck him?
I guess he stalked her. He was impressed by her version of his song, probably.
Okay, well, there you go.
There you go. Anyway, next, XTC with Black Sea. A lot of people tend to believe that 1986's Skylarking, with its lush and pastoral
Like me.
textures, is the band's best album. Yeah, I know. Not me. I much prefer the nervier, edgier, quirkier, more coiled and angular sound of their late 1970s, very early 80s period. And the peak of this period is Black Sea. It was their most full-bodied production up to that point, as well as their most fiercely political, with swipes at militarism and right-wing culture evident in bouncy blasts such as Generals and Majors, Living Through Another Cuba, Towers of London, and Sergeant Rock. XTC's brand of pop may have been skewered, but they never lost their knack for earworm hookiness and memorable tunes with a killer sense of humor, such as Respectable Street and Burning with Optimism's Flames. My pick for their best album. Chris?
Yeah, these guys were really, really great songwriters, and even from the beginning, I am one of those people that thinks that Skylarking is their best record, and that's where they peaked. But this is here they started to turn the corner, and I think that this album has more of a depth to it than the first two records that we covered in previous records. And you mentioned their sense of humor and their satire. Generals and Majors, really great song, Andy Partridge was the shit.
Yep. Next, David Bowie with Scary Monsters. This ended up being Bowie's last great album for a long, long time. Coming right after his legendary Berlin trilogy of albums with Brian Eno, this one gives us the odd rhythms and superb art pop of the big hit single Ashes to Ashes. We also get the dance floor burner and satire of the fashion industry, Fashion, as well as the revved up rocker that is the title track. It's an eclectic record that touches on almost every era Bowie touched on in the second half of the 1970s, but with a shinier, brighter pop sound. Chris?
Yeah, definitely more of a commercial sheen. It kind of predated or it kind of presaged what he did on Let's Dance, which was a more blatant swing for the MTV fences.
Right.
And this album's interesting because it's part dancey and part industrial. Like
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the title song "Scary Monsters and Super Creeps" is almost industrial rock. And then
Yeah.
fashion is like just basically funk.
Right.
So really engaging record, and like you said, it's really eclectic because it does draw. There's a little bit of that Berlin hangover, and it harkens back to Young Americans in a lot of ways too.
Yeah. Next, Susie and the Banshees with Kaleidoscope. This album is basically the start of Banshees Mach 2, with guitarist John McGoach and drummer Budgie replacing John McKay and Kenny Morris, respectively. The claustrophobic, gloomy post-punk sound of the first two albums, as good as they are, is replaced by a lighter touch, a more accessible and melodic sound that portends the alternative rock status the band would maintain for the rest of the decade. Susie Sue really develops and matures as a vocalist on this album as well. Highlights include the skittering pop of Happy House and the hooky, strident power pop of Christine. Chris?
Yeah, Christine is a great song. Yeah, this album is definitely more new wave than post punk.
Yeah.
And because it's a lot more electronicized,
Yeah.
and part of that is because Susie Sue, I guess, had an illness at some point in the year before this, and was cooped up at home. And so while she was home, she taught herself how to play keyboards,
Mm.
and she taught herself how to compose. It turns out
Okay.
that her and one of her bandmates co-wrote all the songs
Yeah.
on the record. So she really stepped up as a songwriter, and turns out to be a better songwriter than the other guys for the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a reason why her name is in the front of the band's name.
Yeah, yeah. It used to be as the singer and as the chick that got hit on in the Sex Pistols talk show appearance, but
Yeah.
it turns out she actually had some genuine talent.
Yeah, right.
Go figure.
Next, Bauhaus with In the Flat Field. For a band known for their dark, macabre image and gloomy goth music, Bauhaus was actually quite eclectic in their sounds, known to incorporate elements of funk and reggae in their sonic stew. Their full-length debut album has some of their best songs: the hypnotic grind of Double Dare, the speedy punk rush of Dive, and the hard rock riffage of Stigmata Martyr. It's really it's a great track, really. And that track, the three instrumentalists of the band would eventually pursue that sound in Stigmata Martyr. The three instrumentalists, the guitarist, bassist, and drummer, would pursue that specific sound later on in another incarnation of Bauhaus called Love and Rockets, which is basically Bauhaus without Peter Murphy. But that's a few years away. Anyway, Bauhaus in the Flat Field, great album. Chris?
Yeah, good, very good record. I'm actually kind of surprised that you didn't include it with the Joy Division record and have like a sort of a Welcome to Goth Rock segment.
Well, because Closer is a much better album than this.
Closer is it definitely is a better record, and but this is a different record. I mean, this is noisier.
Yeah.
This is more abrasive. I mean, this is glammier.
Right.
They actually are a pretty glammed out band.
Yeah, they were. They were.
In terms of their guitar tones and everything like that. And Peter Murphy was a hell of a rock frontman. He's kind of like Iggy Pop, up there, no shirt, wriggling around. Didn't cut himself with glass or any stupid shit like that. But he played the dark sex god pretty well. And and in the course of researching this real quick, I found a kind of a funny review, and it's actually cited in Wikipedia. But Andy Gill of NME bombed the album when it first came out. He describes the album as, quote, nine meaningless moans and flails bereft of even the most cursory contour of interest, a record which deserves all the damning adjectives usually leveled at grim-faced modernists. And he dismissed them as, quote, a hip Black Sabbath.
A hip Black Sabbath.
Yeah,
Ouch.
yeah, I was gonna say, yikes. Yeah, so I was gonna say that's like Hall of Fame bad review.
All right, next. The Fall with Grotesque and in parentheses after the gram. While Marky Smith was one of the most idiosyncratic characters in all of UK post-punk and alternative rock, his band and their multiple lineup changes seem to deliver slight variations on the same sound over and over again in a truly dense and dauntingly large discography. For my money, this is one of the best, if not the best of the bunch. Totally Wired, my pick for the band's best ever song, rocks with a hypnotic groove that most bands would kill for. New Face in Hell is a ramshackle jam that still manages to be catchy and exhilarating at the same time. Just ask Pavement, who basically ripped it off for their song Conduit for Sale later in 1992. And How I Wrote Elastic Man is a delightful romp that seems to parody UK jangle pop 4 years before it even got popular. Chris?
Yeah, it's worth noting that Elastic Man was included on an expanded version of this album. The original version was 10 songs. New Face in Hell, you stole my line. You can basically hear Pavement being born in that song. And you can hear actually like dozens of bands from early 90s indie being born in that song with just sort of the jagged riffage with the sort of the tortured spoken word, the spoken word on meth shtick that Marky Smith did. Yeah, Marky Smith, part of me doesn't take him seriously, but at his best, he actually is really, really great at that, singularly great at that one shtick.
Yeah.
At his best. At his worst, it's like just drivel. But at its best, he's awesome.
Right. Just at his worst is just abstract spoken word rubbish.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Next, Killing Joke and their self-titled debut album. Killing Joke are the band most credited for bridging the gap between post-punk and heavy metal, loved in equal parts by both Kurt Cobain and James Hetfield of Metallica. You can hear it on this album, even on the very opening track with the driving, grungy Requiem. Bloodsport is a fist pumper that seems tailor-made for arenas, while The Weight has a chugging riff that bludgeons you over the head. It's an album that practically bore the blueprint for the heavy alternative rock that would emerge in the late 1980s. Chris?
Yeah, definitely. This is an industrial rock forerunner. This is a forerunner to Nine Inch Nails, to Ministry, and even to bands like Metallica. Like it's worth noting that Metallica covered The Weight on their album Garage Inc. from 1998. Also worth mentioning that the band Helmet, which very underrated band, they covered Primitive in 1993. So worth mentioning that. So, and they also have a bass player, or had a bass player, Killing Joke, who he just went by the name Youth.
Yeah, he became a producer. He produced a lot of people's records.
Yeah, but how don't give a fuck do you have to be to like go by Youth? I mean that's pretty out there.
Yeah, well, like Gordon Sumner went by Sting, Paul Hewson went by Bono. That was
I was going to say
the in thing during this post-punk era.
But youth is very meta. He is
Sure.
Youth.
Speaking of meta, the next band, oh boy, the Dead Kennedys with Fresh Fruit for Rotting Vegetables. Quite possibly the most famous or infamous punk band from the Bay Area scene. The Dead Kennedys brand of furious punk rock was a little too wacky and humor-filled to fit in with hardcore punk, even if their tempos suggested otherwise. Lead singer Jello Biafra's wild and witty political and social satire sometimes went over the heads of some of the meatheads who attended their shows, but sitting down and listening to their records was probably the best way to get the message. Kill the Poor is an audacious attack on the Republican Party's platform, while the haunting yet raging Holiday in Cambodia sends up upper middle class liberals who love to talk about communism and dares them to actually go to a communist country. Let's Lynch the Landlord is revved up surf rock that at first seems ironic. Then you listen and you realize Biafra really is outraged by how the poor are taken advantage of. Satire with some serious socio-political messaging abound in a nearly perfect album that almost makes the rest of their catalog superfluous. Chris?
Yep, punk rock done by a guy who eventually ran for mayor of San Francisco.
Yeah.
Yeah, he Joe Biafra missed the whole he missed the memo about the whole post-punk thing.
Yeah.
He keeps it very, very punk, and he's more political and sort of more, not necessarily more outrageous, but more straightforward, and he's not bratty. He's actually like an adult in the room. So it's kind of
Right.
like it's like punk for adults. It's not like Johnny Rotten, you
Right.
know, uh, you know, talking about abortions. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's more well intended. It's more adult. It's more serious. But the satire is pretty heavy on it. So it's a funny record, but it's also a serious record. And Jello Biafra was the man.
He was awesome. And he's still out there and he's still an activist.
Yep.
All right. Next, The Wipers with Is This Real? Anyone who's read Kurt Cobain's journals knows how much of a fan Cobain was of this Portland, Oregon punk band, The Wipers. And it's easy to see why. This was the indie punk band, led by singer, songwriter, and guitarist Greg Sage, who refused to sign to a major label. Instead, he formed his own label and funded and produced all his own music, as well as acting as his own booking agent. This set an example in the future for bands such as Fugazi, but it wouldn't have mattered if Sage weren't such a great songwriter. The earnestness in his lyrics may be a bit too much for some, but it's offset by a seething rage and disturbing psychodrama that brings to mind Pete Townsend at his most unhinged. Return of the Rat, D7, Potential Suicide, and Window Shop for Love are tight, raging rockers that proved a huge inspiration for the early grunge scene that would soon pop up just 170 miles up north in Seattle. Chris?
Yeah, this band was an obvious influence on Nirvana. In
Yeah.
fact, Nirvana in 1992 in their Live at the BBC
Yep.
set covered D7,
Yep.
and
Great
it was
version, too.
and it was a perfect fit. It
Yeah.
was a perfect fit for Cobain's voice. It was a perfect fit for Dave Grohl's drum style, and so yeah, no, the Wipers, like you said, they're an interesting story. The indie punk band. Yeah, they probably deserved more due because they were that good of a band. Like
Yeah.
they just wrote great songs and were consistent about it on this record, and but never really went much anywhere because of sticking to their guns.
Right.
If they'd sold out a little bit, they could have probably been huge.
He could have been, yeah. And finally, Young Marble Giants with Colossal Youth, another Cobain favorite. The Welsh art pop band Young Marble Giants come across as the quintessential twee indie pop band with just a simple organ, a bass, occasional guitar, and Alison Statton's soft girlish croon as the only sounds carrying their songs through. But there's a lot and quite a bit of anger and hard, subversive social commentary in these twee songs about sexual frustration, alienation, suicide, and societal pressure. Their sole album would reach far and wide in the upcoming years, making fans of and influencing the likes of Nirvana, Hole, The Magnetic Fields, Beat Happening, and Bell and Sebastian. Chris?
Yep, and the album actually made Rolling Stone's 80 best albums of the 80s
There you go.
list at the end of the decade. So it really did cast a wide net among a sort of an elite group. And yeah, it's remarkable in the sense that it's such a quiet record in some ways. Like you
Yeah.
said, it's very spare and it's very quiet. With just those, with the drum machines and the keyboards and just a little bit of guitar here and there. But with the vocals and the lyrics and the anger, it's like
Yeah.
it's like the quietest version of angry
Yeah.
rock imaginable.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's what makes it a really compelling record. And there's actually a song on there, and the name is escaping me, that Hole covered for Live
Credit
Through
in the
This.
Straight World. Credit in the Straight World.
Credit in the Straight World, which is like one of the best songs on the record. And Hole included that in 1994, which is actually a perfect fit because Courtney Love is definitely a progeny of this band
Sure. Yeah.
for sure.
All right, so we have reached the end of 1980. We've reached the end of the third golden age of rock. It's been long, but we finally did it. After this, it's 1981 and the Reagan era, and mostly for the worse.
Yeah, which is why the golden age stops here.
Exactly. And but music, there's still some good music in the 1980s. And our next couple of episodes will continue the 1980s, but not in the way that you think. You gotta tune into our Facebook page, and we'll give you hints about it next week.
Yes.
In the meantime, Chris, what do you have to say?
Speaking of the Facebook page, it's good business up there. Arturo posts lots of great stuff. He got you ready for and whetted your appetite for this here 1980 record or album or episode or whatever the fuck you call it. He whetted your appetite this week and got you ready for it. And we've had good participation up there lately. So we want you to become a member. Go to facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock. The group is invite only, but chances are we'll let you in. Come and join in the merriment and mirth. Do you have anything to say about what we had to say here? Do you have any disagreements? Do you think that Prince's album is awful? Do you think that any of this stuff sucked? Or do you think that we forgot anything that should have been inclusion in the lightning round? Well, let us know, or write to us at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. And as always, we will have a Spotify playlist dedicated to the music of 1980. And, we've been making these Spotify playlists for a year and a half. It's a real value add for the podcast. We're really proud of these playlists that we put together. You can find the link for this playlist in the episode description wherever you're capturing this here podcast, whether that's Apple or Stitcher or Amazon or wherever else. And enjoy the sounds of 45 years ago. It was a great year, and we captured it well. And with that, folks, we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.